Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I am so thrilled to be here as your host, Annika Jackson, with John Follis. John has a very storied career on Madison Avenue. He's an award winner, working for agencies, having his own agency, shifting to being a marketing therapist for small brands and entrepreneurs, which I'm very passionate about that space, so love. And now, John, I am going to ask you that hated question. What are you doing these days? What are you doing to help others learn about this crazy world of marketing, advertising, and how to put together for our businesses?
Hey, Annika, so nice of you to have me on your show as a guest. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So my career was long and varied. It really evolved. And I think it's an important thing for your listeners to consider, because I think it's going to be very rare that someone who is successful at doing what they're doing now will still be successful doing it exactly the same way 10 years from now or 5 years from now or even a couple of years from now, only because the landscape is constantly changing.
Yeah.
So one of the things I realized very early on in my career is that if I didn't keep paying attention to the business landscape and respond and adapt accordingly, I would not be in the position I am right now, which is that, as I said to you earlier, I don't have to worry about hustling anymore. I can, focus on my tennis game and doing interviews like this, which I really love doing because I love sharing whatever wisdom I may have accumulated in 35 years of, working. But yeah, you're right. I started out in New York working in the ad business on Madison Avenue for some of the biggest and best ad agencies on brands like Coke and Pizza Hut and Volkswagen. So it was a great training ground to learn about big brands. However, I hated the corporate world. I really did not have much success in that corporate environment. And after about 8 or 10 years of that, decided to freelance in New York. And that's really, that kind of entrepreneurial pivot was really the start of the success that I had for the next 20 years of my career, because I ended up getting involved in some ad campaigns that were very successful and ended up attracting a guy who turned out to be my business partner. He actually called me out of the blue because he wanted to find out who was involved with this very successful ad campaign and got my name. And we met at a bar. And 20 minutes after talking about it, he said, let's start an ad agency, which was kind of bizarre to hear. It's kind of like going on a date with someone and after 20 minutes having someone say, let's get married.
Right.
But we started collaborating within a year. We did have an agency, and the first account that we worked on was we did a TV campaign that was so successful, it ended up becoming a case study for the Harvard Business Review. So it's Harvard Business School. So that was quite a home run to hit right out of the gate as two guys who were in their mid-30s trying to start an ad agency, and did that for a few years. But that was at the time, it was kind of at the dawn of the internet. And I was paying attention to that. And my partner really wasn't. And I just, even though we were very successful, I could see that this internet thing was going to be something that I thought was going to be really significant. And for that reason, we parted ways. And although I continued doing a lot of traditional advertising, I started getting more involved in all things digital. And this was in the mid to late 90s. And as I suspected, in the late 90s, when I went to, and the other thing is, I think it's one way to pay attention and kind of stay relevant is to kind of do your market research, right?
Right.
Especially if you're an entrepreneur, I think you have to really do whatever you can to keep your finger on the pulse of trends and things. And one way I would do that is when I went to networking events, I would kind of talk to people. And I found when I started, I used to introduce myself at these networking events because the question always comes up, so what do you do, right?
Always.
Hated question. And you have, basically, you're going to say something that's either going to want to get them to continue talking to you or say, excuse me, I need to grab a drink and walk away. And that's going to be determined by how you answer that question, right? And I found in the late 90s when I said, well, I'm an advertising guy, I have an award-winning Madison Avenue agency, more and more people would say, oh, that's interesting. Excuse me, I got to grab a drink. Because many of them were small business owners who got nervous when they heard the A word.
Oh, yeah.
They were interested in talking about marketing, not so much advertising, because to them that signified media-based stuff that they couldn't afford. And this was at a time when all things digital were becoming more and more. They wanted to know about websites.
Yeah.
In late 90s, that was the hot topic. So if I said I was a website designer, they would have talked my ear off, or they would have, started. So I started introducing myself, not as an advertising person, but a marketing person. And that's when they wouldn't stop talking about me, because they all had marketing questions. So that was one of the things that helped me evolve my business. The other one, Annika, was when I got a call. This was maybe 2004. I got a call from a woman out of the blue who said, "You have to help me. I need your consulting." And I said, "Well, who are you and how'd you get my number?" And she heard me give a presentation, and she was also referred to me. And you know what it's like whenever someone is referred to you, you have that third party referral. That makes all the difference, right? When someone's, you got to talk to Annika, she's brilliant. And the fact that she also heard me give a presentation really convinced me that I could help her. But she didn't need advertising. What she really was looking for was marketing consulting. And at the time, I had no business model built around consulting at the time, because I still kind of saw myself as a traditional ad agency. And I tried to basically get her off the phone, because I didn't think that was a smart business model to trade my hours for dollars. I was getting paid by clients on retainer and projects. And I thought, for anyone building a business, that's the way to do it. Get a retainer, get a project fee. Don't trade your hours for dollars. That's thinking too small, because I thought my time was worth much more than she or anyone else could afford to pay me per hour. So I said, "I'm sorry, whatever her name was, I don't do that. Good luck." And she wouldn't let me off the phone.
She was persistent.
And again, when someone is convinced they can help you, and again, if someone is referred to you or sees something, a podcast that you've done or a presentation, and they know a bit about you and they're convinced in their mind, they're sold, there's no way they don't want to work with you. And I figured at that point, I said, let me just give her a dollar amount that she probably can't afford, but maybe she can. So I said, let me think about it. Let's talk tomorrow. And that overnight, this was in 2004, I had to come up with a dollar amount for her to say yes or no to. And I thought she would say no. It was $250 an hour in 2004. Today, that might be $350, $400 an hour. I don't know. And she paused for about 2 seconds and said, "Okay." And I said, "Oh, and I get paid up front." And she said, "Okay." And she came to my apartment, and I said, "Do you have the check?" And she sat on my couch, and for about 50 minutes, she just poured her heart out. And I felt like a freaking therapist, because anyone who runs a business, it's such a personal thing. When they're talking about their issues, it is very therapy-like when you're talking to them. I'm sure you deal with small business owners all the time, so I'm sure you can relate to that. So I had to interrupt her, because she thought she was talking for a few minutes. She was talking for almost the entire hour.
My gosh.
I had to say, "Excuse me, but our time is almost up." I was sitting there with my legal pad taking notes, and I did feel like a therapist. And I said, "I'm sorry, our time is almost up. We have to stop in a few minutes." And I wanted to give her some feedback, to which she said, "You're kidding me. I feel like I'm just getting started." And I said, "So what do you want to do?" She said, "Well, we have to meet again." And I said, "Okay." Scheduled. And at that point, I thought maybe I have a business model here. If I could figure out how to brand it. And it didn't take a rocket science to figure out, well, I don't want to call myself John Follis, the marketing consultant.
Right.
Especially when I felt like half of what I was just doing was acting like a therapist, like a business therapist. So I said, marketing therapy, that'll be it. And I could develop the whole logo. I got excited about that, because all of a sudden my creativity kicked in, and I said, oh, let me start designing the logo and start building the brand around marketing therapy. And that's what I did for the next 15 years. And in 2005, that was pretty new, because not a lot of people, that was when voice over IP was just starting. So we may not have had the video component to do it around the country, but we certainly were able to do this one-on-one, from the audio standpoint. And that's what I did. So I did that for a few years until that became kind of, I thought, dated. And around 2012, the hot thing, again, back to the networking, I would say, well, I'm a marketing consultant or marketing therapist. And they said, that's interesting. I have to get a drink. And the hot topic was video. And I've been doing video since the late 90s. So I was fine with hearing them say they need more video because as a creative person, I said, well, I can offer that to them. So that's when I started. And that's when, I don't know if you know the term explainer videos back in 2012. That was like one of the top 10 most searched things on Google. And everyone was wanting their explainer videos with the whiteboard and all that stuff. So I said,
little animations. Yeah.
Yeah. I said, damn, I could do that. I didn't stop doing the marketing therapy. I just added another business model that I called Big Idea Video. And, if you wanted consulting or marketing therapy, that's fine. I could do that. But if also you needed some more video content, I and my video team can offer you that as well. So anyway, that kind of brought me up to a few years ago when I realized I really didn't need to do any of that anymore. Yeah. I could just kind of do what I wanted to do. And that's where I am now.
Which is where we all aspire to be eventually. And for those of us who are still in the grind, first of all, I love that you were at the forefront of so many things because I just see a lot of parallels between what you were doing years ahead of your time compared to now when business coaching, having marketing consultants, especially for small businesses, is still so important and a growing industry, right? I was working for a startup magazine publisher in the late 90s and remember the advent of the internet and going into AOL chat rooms to find people to promote the magazine and the music, that was coming to their town through the magazine that I was getting involved with. So it's really interesting to see how much things have changed. And then the fact that you went from advertising to marketing, because I think that's another thing that's changed when you look at communications overall is there's PR, there's marketing, there's advertising, but now it's also integrated and you have to make sure that everything is congruent in your messaging and how your storytelling across those platforms is very integrated. So you were doing all of these things before people even had, I think, the right language for them or knew that they needed these services or wanted them.
Well, it always was integrated, Annika, but it's just the portions changed. Because at one time there was no internet.
Right.
And then there was a little bit of internet. And now it's, for a lot of people, it's all internet. So it always was, even in the 90s and the 80s when I started, it was integrated. It was just, they were just different portions, things shift. And, I didn't even mention, thank you for saying what you just said, but one of the other things I got involved in that you'll appreciate is podcasting. I was reading about podcasting in 2005. And just like you think it's a cool thing to do, I thought it was a cool thing to do back then. And I learned how to podcast by listening to a bunch of podcasts. And in February of 2006, I had the marketing show with John Follis and did that for 7 years. So I can appreciate being on your side of the microphone.
Thank you. Now, when you started your career, did you know that you wanted to be an ad man? Was that your aspiration? And my follow-up to that is, you also got fired 4 times in 7 years when you started this career.
Yeah.
And I think something that people don't want to hear about is not just all the success that you had, but what were those hiccups, right? And they're not necessarily failures because they led you to your next experience or they taught you who you want to work with or who you don't want to work with. But yes, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that part of your backstory.
Yeah. Well, on the firing issue, there's a saying in the ad business that you can't be any good if you haven't been fired at least once.
Oh, gosh.
So I guess that makes me very, 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 very good. Was that 4 times? Yeah. But back to your original question, no, I didn't know I wanted to be in advertising. Although I must say, I created my first ad when I was 15 years old for my lawn mowing service. I was looking to do some summer work, and I came up with the idea of mowing people's lawns. And I created a flyer. And the headline I came up with, which actually is not bad for 15 years old, was "You grow it, we mow it."
Very clear messaging there.
So
Very clear.
that was my first ad, age 15, on a flyer that I stuck in people's mailboxes. But no, I can't say that I knew I wanted to be in advertising. I was always talented artistically because my mom was an art teacher. Growing up with that influence, I was always excelled artistically, but I never realized that I could apply. I didn't want to be a painter or an illustrator, so I didn't know what options there were to be an artistic person. My dad was a business guy, so I assumed I would have to choose some kind of business to go into. So for the first 2 years of college, I was majoring in undecided. And had it not been for an instructor, when I was a sophomore, I was taking the only graphic design course that university was offering. And about halfway through the course, the instructor pulled me aside and said, "Can I ask you what you want to do with your life?" I said, "Well, why are you asking?" She said, "Because you're super talented. And I really think you ought to pursue something that allows you to develop your artistic skills." And I said, "Well, thanks. Like what?" And she said, "Well, the first thing I would suggest to you is get the hell out of this school because they don't offer shit.
Oh my gosh.
As far as, any kind of visual or creative arts, you ought to get to a school that offers you more of a smorgasbord of career options." And so she suggested Syracuse University, which is where my dad graduated. So that was an easy sell. That was more expensive than the school I was going to. So Syracuse is one of the top schools in the country for many things, but one of them is communications and advertising. So that's how I ended up in advertising. Graduated there with a pretty good portfolio. As far as getting fired, one of the things they don't teach you in college, and they didn't teach you back then, and I don't think they teach you that now, is how to deal with the bullshit that you have to deal with in a corporate environment, especially in a corporate environment. I call it the tribal ecosystem. I just made a video about that. I think I sent it to you a week or so ago. But I talk about that because I think most people, especially if they find themselves in a corporate environment, when people say, when I tell people I'm in advertising, they say, "Oh, Mad Men. And I say, no. My career is more like Survivor, because I was dealing with the tribal ecosystem that anyone who's worked in a corporate environment has to deal with. And if you really aren't good at it or aren't prepared to dealing with it, you're not going to survive." And that's not always the case, but in 2 of the times I got fired, the guy who brought me in ended up leaving the company within weeks after bringing me in. And as you and probably many of your listeners can appreciate, when the guy who is the reason that you're at that company is no longer there to kind of support you and cover your back, you're just going to be more vulnerable. It doesn't mean you're going to get fired, but it just means that the possibility of you losing your job is going to increase exponentially if that person isn't there. So that was 2 of the 4 times. And also, I tend to be, it's kind of funny now, it's easy to look back and say this, I've always been a bit irreverent and kind of an independent thinker, which doesn't play well in a corporate environment. So the things that got me in trouble at those big companies are the same things that made me really, really, really successful on my own.
Yes. I was going to say, it sounds like you've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. And I think most people who become entrepreneurs are not as set up as well for success in a corporate world. I think I'm probably almost unhireable for most companies because my career's been all over the place and I've done a lot of really cool things and different things, but they've given me the experience to do what I can do today and help the kind of businesses and companies that I help today. So it's something unique that you bring that they're not going to appreciate.
Exactly. And sometimes you don't know that until, I did like what most people did. You get out of school, you want a job, you want to work at a reputable company. For me, it was a big agency, get myself on Madison Avenue and all that stuff. So I didn't realize that until I was thrown out on my ass a few times and, had to tread water and do whatever I could to survive, which turned out to be freelancing. But anyway, yeah.
Well, what is one of the biggest things that you saw people coming to with you for the marketing therapy? Were there common themes and threads of things that people weren't thinking of that were maybe right in front of their faces and should have realized would be a great part of their marketing strategy?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you probably know really, really well, because you deal with a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners, is that any business owner, business of any size, has marketing challenges. The problem with people who are running a business is they don't have the objectivity to see things that someone like you or I might see about their business after just a few minutes of chatting with them. For example, one of my best clients as a marketing consultant was a guy that initially wanted to work with me because he thought he needed a TV commercial. And he was referred to me as a guy who could come up with a great idea for a TV commercial, which I would have been happy doing for him. This was shortly after I started marketing therapy, and I don't think he even realized I was doing that because he thought me as an ad guy who could do a TV commercial for him. But in trying to learn about his business to do this TV commercial, I started asking him a few questions. And within 5 or 10 minutes, I realized that the last thing this guy needed was a TV commercial. He just didn't realize that. I mean, this was in 2004, Annika, and he didn't even have a website.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't want to talk myself out of a well-paying project, but it's hard for me not to be honest with people when I see problems in their business that they don't know about. So at the risk of possibly losing, he could have said, well, screw you, I'll find someone else to do it. I had to kind of really be diplomatic in how I presented it to him. And I said, well, Bob, whatever his name was, I said, listen, you don't have a website. So if you're doing a TV commercial on cable, you're going to probably want to direct them someplace. They may not immediately want to pull out their credit card and pay the $500 that you're asking them for this program that you want them to sign up for. They may want to go somewhere, just, that's a lot of money to spend just after watching it, even if it's a 2-minute commercial or 60-second commercial. Yeah. They might want to be a little bit more, digest a little bit more information about the product you're offering. Don't you think having a website would help? And I said, I offer this marketing consulting thing, this marketing therapy thing. Why don't you take a look at it? Because I think if we were to talk a little bit, I could probably save you some money. And, because producing a commercial and then spending the media money on a TV commercial, that's a lot. That's tens of thousands of dollars. That may be something you want to do, but maybe not right now. And I love getting testimonies because his testimony after working with me was that I saved him $50,000. And that's probably the best testimony I've ever gotten because, he was ready to spend that.
Yeah.
So anyway, my point is that everyone I've talked to, the common theme is that they don't know, they aren't able to see the blemishes in their own business, the problems. They may think they know what the problem is, but half the time the problem they think they're focused on is the wrong problem to focus on. And they don't really know that until they talk to someone who is experienced in business and dealing with entrepreneurs and maybe has gone through the whole entrepreneurial experience themselves and knows from their own personal experience all the things that they have to deal with to really be able to act as a really constructive sounding board and get them really focused on the things they need to focus on. Because you could waste a lot of time and money going down the wrong path.
Yeah.
Back in 2004, Annika, the conversations had to deal with things that people may not be dealing with right now.
Yeah.
Because that was almost 20 years ago. The questions had to do with my website and do I need video on my website? Now, I would like to think that everyone realizes they need to have video on their website. If they don't, no, you need video on your website. You need to have a YouTube channel.
Like back then, but now there's even more of those shiny objects. So which is the best strategy? And there's so many experts out there who are going to sell you their method and their strategy. And I see a lot of small businesses, including my own. And I think that's one of the great things and maybe the hard things, right, about being entrepreneurs who also are marketers is we're always in the process of refining our own marketing strategies. But the good thing is because we're looking at everything that's out there, we can help others make better decisions as to what they're putting their efforts into.
Well, here's the other thing I'll say, Annika. Smart business owners realize they can't be trying to solve all their marketing issues themselves.
Yeah.
So the smart ones know they need marketing help. The problem is they don't know who of all these marketing gurus like you are the ones to really hire and pay. Should I do Annika's brand amplifier or should I do Joe Schmo's brand kick-ass, brand, whatever? because there's a gazillion people like you tooting their own horn saying that just do my program and with my 10 easy steps, I'll multiply your blah, blah, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, it's true. The funny thing is, I think it kept me from launching a program or anything for a long time because I didn't want to be in that same space of everybody else who's tooting their own horn and shouting. But it's that push-pull of also realizing there are all these small businesses who don't fundamentally understand their own brand, which they need to do foundationally to understand how they're going to create their marketing and their PR messages out of that and their ad campaigns or whatever else they're going to put in their marketing toolbox.
It's one reason why I'm really glad I don't have to do this anymore. Because, it's exhausting. I got to be on TikTok. I got to do Instagram Reels. Did I say the right thing? And it's not just putting out content. It's putting out the right content. And how do you really get people excited? Because it's not just about putting a lot of shit on the wall and seeing what sticks, although there's part of it. Mm-hmm. It's like, how do you really get people excited? I mean, that was my mantra. And people are good at informing people. But what turns a prospect into a client is when you excite them. And very few marketing people are really good at getting their products excited enough to pull out their credit cards.
Yeah. When you made the transition from other agencies to your own agency and then to your other businesses, the marketing therapy, video creation, did you see that the clients that you were working with, besides not maybe having $1 million budgets, maybe some of them did, but the big budgets that you think of when you think of Madison Ave and you think of ad agencies or Mad Men, beyond the budgets and maybe the number of people on the team, were there a lot of differences or a lot of similarities to the ways that the different brands and companies would approach their needs or their marketing questions?
Well, every business is unique. There are commonalities. Again, this is probably stuff because you deal with them. There's certain common threads with all of them, but no two businesses are exactly alike. So a lot of it has to do with the personality of the person who is running that business, right? Mm-hmm. Which is why I felt like I couldn't begin to start solving business problems unless I had some really quality one-on-one time. It's not a cookie, the only thing that cookie cutter solutions work well for are cookies. Okay, did I say that right?
Yeah.
The only thing that cookie cutter solutions work really well for are cookies. And I know and there's so many business experts and marketing gurus who do these cookie cutter solutions, these funnels or these channels or these programs. That's not what I did. I felt it needed to be much more customized and more personal because of what I just said, that even though that there may be similarities to a lot of businesses, every business is a little bit different and you can't treat every business the same way. And even if you're off a little bit, you could be sending someone could be thinking they're solving their marketing problems, but because of some nuance related to their business, it could be just a waste of time and money. Mm-hmm. And that's why I required, before I started even coming up with answers, solutions, I started just talking to them and getting to really immerse myself into what their business is, all the nuances of their business is, and also them as a person, their personalities. And then combined with that knowledge about them as a person and their product or service as a business, I felt like I was in a much better position to begin offering some suggested solutions to them. Mm-hmm. And that's when, some of the solutions I could help them solve because they involved a creative solution, be it a video or maybe a new taglines, a new branding, a new logo or something that I could then switch gears and have me and my team help them with. Or if it had to do with, SEO or SEM or AdWords or some shit that I didn't want to bother with, I would just send them off to some, SEM guy.
Right.
Or SEO guy, because much as I respect analytics, that's not what I know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I think that's how, even with like my brand amplifier program, it's a very personalized approach. There's a lot of questions and inquiry that are the same questions that we go through for each person. I'm sure very much like when you have those one-on-ones, you had a few questions that you wanted to get the answers for, but then you'd figure out what else you needed to ask and what else you needed to dig into. And so that
right. It's out of the questions. It's almost like an investigative journalist.
Right.
I've always loved investigative journalism. Again, I think you have a journalism background, right?
I teach grad students at Annenberg, USC Annenberg, and I do some writing, and I've podcasted and had radio shows and things like that.
So you teach what? Journalism?
I teach PR, and I also teach digital media management.
Okay. So again, a lot of marketing people are really good at selling, aren't good at asking questions. They aren't good at listening. Mm-hmm. They're really, really good at talking and tooting their horn and promoting their program and all that stuff. Not so much good at really sitting down and listening to their clients' issues. And I think, again, everyone's got their own way of being a marketing person. This was just the way I chose to do it because I thought it was the most effective way. And, I'm pleased to say that for the clients that I ended up working with, I was very successful. I prided myself on the testimonies that I got from the successful consulting that I did with these people because I thought that was a good way to attract more business by third-party testimonials, not me tooting my horn.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you were honored at both the White House and the UN for your work.
Yeah, that was the trip. Who would have thought an advertising guy would be invited to the White House and, get a photo op with the First Lady? It was kind of a fluke. I mean, ad people in general are not invited to the White House because of anything they've done, right? It's usually, military veterans or people who have come up with cures to some disease or something like that. But so when I got the invitation, I thought it was a joke. I was sure it was a joke. You get something in the mail with the White House as a return address. This is not serious. But that's how I got the invitation. I was always got involved in a lot of public service work. I always felt during my career it was an important thing to try to find the time to do. So it came as a result of my personal involvement with doing some work for child abuse prevention.
Wow.
I came up with an ad just on my own. I had an idea. I saw something on TV that sparked an idea for an ad. And, that's the beauty of being a creative person. You never know when you're going to get hit with a great ad. And I worked up the ad. I showed it to my partner. He said, "Oh my God, this is one of the best ads I've ever seen. We got to find someone to run this ad." And it was just kind of like a series of connecting the dots. Reached out to the National Child Abuse Organization, who at the time was trying to work out a deal with the NBA to accept them as one of their public service, forget the term, but all the major sports leagues always associate themselves with certain nonprofit organizations because it's just cause marketing.
Right.
It's a good way to build their brand, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't realize that the time we reached out to the child abuse organization that they were in discussions with the NBA, but all we knew is that we didn't want to send the ad in the mail or send it via email to them. That's not a way you sell things. You want to have set it up, have that one-on-one and do the pitch and say, okay, and here's the ad we did, right? So they told us, they were in Chicago. They said, "We're going to be in New York in a couple of weeks. Why don't you meet us at the NBA offices?" And we're saying, the NBA offices? Okay. That was just up the street from our agency. We had no idea why the NBA offices. And we go to the NBA offices and suddenly we're sitting around the table. It was so bizarre. And they invite us. And we thought it was just going to be these two women who were, from Chicago. And they said, "John, why don't you join the meeting?" All of a sudden we're looking around. There's 10 people around this big conference table. And 8 of them are from the NBA.
Wow.
And we have a child abuse ad. And we're like, what the hell, And we showed them the ad and we're saying, all of a sudden, we're not just showing it to these two people, but we're now selling it apparently to these NBA people. And they rejected the ad. They didn't like the ad.
Oh.
And they started all of a sudden, and we realized in retrospect, they really weren't interested in the ad. The reason we were there is because they were trying to close the deal with the NBA to have the NBA give them millions of dollars worth of TV airtime to do some TV commercials during the NBA playoffs. And they were looking for an ad agency to do some national TV spots. We didn't know any of that.
Wow.
So I'm trying to sell this ad and my partner's kicking me under the table because he realizes what's happening. And I'm still thinking, I want to sell this damn ad. This is a great ad. And he's kicking me under the table because he's starting to see,
it's this much
the
bigger,
fog clear what's happening. And we're about to be offered opportunity to do some national TV spots that are going to be running during the NBA game. So when I finally shut up, they started saying, well, have you guys done much TV? And we said, yeah, we have. And they said, because, and then, they revealed what was going on. And we ended up doing these TV commercials for a child abuse prevention that were really creatively out of the box. I mean, I wasn't going to accept the assignment if the NBA was going to tell us, we just want to have our NBA players reading a script with a little kid on his knee. We said, you could get any TV production company to do that.
Right.
If we're going to be involved in this, we want to do some great spots that people are going to talk about, hopefully. And that's what we did. And apparently someone at the White House, could have been the president at the time, was George Bush the first. This was long ago. Somehow, someone at the White House, I still don't know who it was, but it could have been the president, said, those are great TV spots. Let's find out who did those and get them to the White House. Because they were honoring people from around the country who were involved in a variety of public service causes. It wasn't just me. It was me and a couple dozen other people who, got the photo op with the first lady and the whole thing. But that's how we got invited. I mean, it was mind blowing to get an invitation. I thought I really did. Who gets invited to the White House?
Yeah, not very many people. But the fact that this came out of, you just had the creative spark, you had a concept, an idea, and you felt passionate about your creative.
I know, to think that it came out of me watching TV, eating potato chips one night, and a year later, that experience would end up with me getting a photo op at the White House is a pretty good story, which is why I make these little video stories about my career. And that happens to be one of them.
Well,
because it's just right now, it's a great story,
Oh, and it's very inspirational as well. It reminds people who are entrepreneurs to keep on going and to not discount when they have that idea that sparks in them. It could end up being something really amazing that leads to fantastic work. I'd
like to think it is inspirational, and so it makes me feel good to hear you say that. But to conclude this story, as if that wasn't enough, 4 months later, I get another letter in the mail. This time it's from the United Nations. And it's saying, dear Mr. Follis, we'd like to inform you that your public service ad for child abuse prevention has just been awarded the first ever public service, United Nations Award for Public Service. So this is to acknowledge that you've won that award and to invite you to the United Nations to receive your award. So 6 months later, I hopped on my bicycle, rode up the 18 blocks, and got another photo op at the UN receiving my award. And that was for the ad that got rejected, ironically.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
The ad that got rejected was the ad that we ended up selling to another child abuse organization. It did run. And somehow, again, someone at the UN saw this and that happened. So I guess, that's what happens when you never know the power of a great idea. You never know. You can't, if there's a moral to this story is that, never underestimate the power of a great idea.
I love that. I want to keep asking you for more and more of your stories, but what I'm going to do is direct people to your video series and to be able to watch them and keep learning from you.
Okay.
And John, since you're not doing the marketing therapy and the videos, you're really enjoying your tennis game and coming on podcasts.
I just finished, sorry for interrupting you, but just to clarify that, I just finished this True Stories in Advertising, which are what these videos are. I started the first one in 2015, and just last week, I finished the 10th and last one in the series. So that's been a passion project that I've been working on for the past 7 years now. And it's called True Stories in Advertising, and it can be found on YouTube and Vimeo if people are looking for it.
I'm going to share that with my digital media management students at USC, because I think they'll be really interested in the series. It'll help them also formulate their many, many homework assignments on using ad tech and MarTech and looking at how things have changed.
You know what's fun? I'm glad you said that, because I just got invited today, as a matter of fact, to a local college that I'd spoken at a couple of years ago. One of the things I told you before we started recording is that now one of the things I really enjoy doing is sharing my stories, especially if I think they could be educational or inspirational. So So I believe it or not, a few years ago, I was invited to speak at Yale University. They have something called the Entrepreneurial Institute. Mm-hmm. It's always fun getting invited to speak at colleges that would never allow you, have you be a student there.
Oh, no.
Accept you as a student. But there's another local community college that had me up there a couple of years ago where I actually did screen a couple of these true stories for the reason you just mentioned. It happened to be a film class, but they were also involved in digital marketing and things like that. So I just shared my latest video that I think I shared with you a week or so ago, which is now private because of some legal sensitivities. So I could share it with you again. You might need a password to access it. But more than any of these other videos, I think this latest one would be the most interesting to any student because it just covers so many bases, many of which I just shared in this podcast with you. But I'll share it with you again if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Because I think if you like it, we can continue the conversation and maybe via Zoom, if you think it's appropriate and you have the technical ability to do that. I'm going to be going up physically to this college in a few weeks when they screen it and to engage the students. But my hope is that I can do that via Zoom with other colleges and universities around the country that see the benefit of watching a video like the one I've just made, and then maybe having a little Q&A with someone like me. So again,
awesome.
I'll leave it up to you. I'll share it with you. Feel free to watch it and, we could take it from there. But
100%.
That to me, I think that would be a good use of my time. If I could, do that with other colleges around the country, I think that'd be fun.
I think that colleges all over would love to have you do that very thing. And that was actually going to bring me into, it was such a nice segue, what you want to do now and what you're looking at doing to still continue, because it's so clear that even though you're not actively working, you are still keeping yourself abreast of what's changing in the field and what people need to know now.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok. I didn't dance, but I wanted to figure it out last year. So I said, I got to figure this out just because I like challenges and like solving problems. But what I really like doing is what you and I are doing is this. When I was working in New York, I used to teach as an adjunct professor myself because I enjoyed engaging students. I taught at, I don't know if you know these schools, but Parsons School of Design, Fashion Institute of Technology, otherwise known as FIT, and SVA, otherwise known as School of Visual Arts, otherwise known as SVA. These are three of the top advertising marketing schools in the country, and they were right down the street from me in New York. So during my career, I enjoyed doing that. And that's kind of what I enjoy now doing, virtually through Zoom, just again, sharing anything that might educate or inspire people who are, asking questions about these things.
Yeah. Well, if somebody's starting out in their journey, if you have, I know this is hard to distill, one piece of advice for their marketing, branding, advertising efforts, what's one place where they should start?
One place that they should start?
One concept, one thought.
Yeah, I would say stay curious. I would come across, again, this is kind of what made me split off from my partner in the mid-90s when I kind of saw the tea leaves of the internet.
Yeah.
I was always curious about the internet. In 96, I wasn't sure what a website was, but I knew I wanted one. So, my first website went up in 96. My first podcast went up 10 years later in 2006. And it was based on the fact that I was always, and maybe this part and parcel with being a creative person, I think you have to stay curious. That's what's inspired that child abuse ad. When I was watching this TV program and I said, gee, that's an interesting piece of information. I wonder if I could turn that into an ad. And it had the wheels in my head not turned in that way, I would never have been honored at the White House. We would have never done those national TV spots for the NBA that, were just great to, have. Probably of everything that I've done on my career, that's one of the few things I've done. I just talked to a guy I was playing tennis with last week who, was a basketball fan. And I told him, I described a couple of the commercials that ran in 1991 during the NBA playoffs. He said, oh my God, I remember that TV spot.
Wow.
That's really the only thing I've done that, anyone might remember. So anyway, stay curious would be my suggestion.
Fantastic advice. And, my last couple questions are, what is the easiest place for people to find you and learn more? Watch your videos, get your advice.
Easiest place would be Google if they know how to spell my name.
Okay.
I think there's one other John Follis that has a lot of content online, but I think I'm pretty much crushing it when it comes to, Google content. So if you just type in John Follis, Follis, in Google or YouTube, if you want to stick the word advertising or marketing, that may help, but that's probably the easiest way. Or go to my website is Follis Inc., FOLLISINC.
Awesome.
FollisInc.com. That's somewhere else.
Great. And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Sure.
And John, you've given us so much great advice. Love hearing your story and everything that you've done. And I know we could be here for hours. I could just listen to more and more of what your career has been like and people you've worked with. It'd be fascinating. So we'll have to have you on another time. We'll definitely have to have you come speak to my students. Do you have any mantras or favorite quotes or words that you live by?
Well, the quote that got me involved with public service was a great quote by a guy named Bill Bernbach, who was the co-founder of one of the most successful Madison Avenue agencies, and he was a true madman. His quote was that the advertising people in this country are the most skilled communicators in history. It would be an amazing thing if we as advertising people could use our creative skills toward making the world better. And I stumbled on that quote when I was 22.
Wow.
And I think that was probably the genesis of getting me to think about, yes, I really resonated with that message. Because, as much as it's exciting to sell ding dongs and Twinkies and fish sticks and car batteries and soda and, McDonald's, to think that you could apply those same creative communication skills toward stopping or helping a family who's dealing with child abuse is, I think, a much bigger legacy to leave the world with, right?
Indeed. Yeah. This has been a fantastic conversation. John, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciated having you as a guest. Thank you to our audience for coming back and listening to another amazing expert share his wisdom. I'll be back again in a couple days with another great expert. And thank you for coming to Your Brand Amplified. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.